I love them, and I love my sisters, I love my brother, I love my dad, I love my mom, and I love my pets. They are included in the family category. And this video makes me happy, so I just rewatched it a lot, and I just love is so lovely.
This is Esther Earl. At the age of 12, living in France, she was diagnosed with a rare form of thyroid cancer and tolerated that pain for an additional 4 years until her death on August 25, 2010. But the life she lived up until then was one of complete somber. At the start of 2014, her parents came out with a book called The Star Won't Go Out, which consisted of a collection of Esther's memoirs, journal entries, medical updates, and even the stories she herself imagined. Esther always wanted to be a writer, and her parents granted that wish by sharing her life with the rest of the world. While her creative stories were inserted by the end, the real treat was the documentation that followed this girl's remaining years and how she chose to live them. You get a sense of who Esther was personally, the bonds she strengthened with her family and online friends, as well as the raw thoughts of a teenager trying to accept death at such a young age. Though this book spreads a lot more love than negativity thanks to Esther's mom keeping the spirit alive through online support, and of course, John Green. It wasn't until a 2009 Wizard Rock convention that she got the chance to meet the Vlogbrothers, Hank and John Green. Being an incredible fan of Harry Potter and their YouTube channel, she and John hit it off pretty well and kept their conversations going through Skype and the chat room where she socialized with her online companions, calling themselves Catitude. A friendship grew between the two, and their next personal meetup wouldn't happen until 2 months prior to her death. A Make-A-Wish event was organized where she would spend the weekend hanging out with her online friends, catch a performance from some of her favorite Wizard Rock bands, and spend a whole day with John Green. From this book, I got a good understanding of their relationship and why The Fault in Our Stars was dedicated in her name. Some could look at it as fate that brought them together, since at the time he was working on the book focused on the kid with cancer, but never intended to turn Esther into some sort of research project. The friendship they shared was genuine, and although parts of her exist within the story, it's wrong to say that this is about her. This is not Esther's story. This is about Hazel Grace Lancaster and the unfortunate fault in her stars. With a story like this, you naturally expect the narrative to be cushioned between a sweet and melancholy tone that puts the subject on the pedestal, transforming him or her into this symbol of hope and basically making an example of them for others to follow. What's important for writers to understand is that when you are writing a character who has a certain illness or condition or disability, always flesh out the person first, because if there's anything to glean from this story, it would be not to define people based on their illness.
I was diagnosed when I was 13.
No, not your cancer story, your real story. Your interests, your hobbies, your passions, your weird fetishes.
John Green understood this well by adding a lot of cynical humor and introspective thought with our protagonist, Hazel Grace Lancaster. At the age of 13, she was diagnosed with stage 4 thyroid cancer, but with the help of this fictional experimental drug called Phalanx-4, her condition is, for the most part, stable. With weak lungs that rely on her handy-dandy canister, she's homebound and lives comfortably with her supportive parents. Because of her condition, she dropped out of school, got her GED, and started taking online college courses. Her life has become very secluded from the rest of the world, and after being diagnosed with clinical depression, she's recommended to join a support group and connect with other cancer survivors. I really enjoyed Hazel as a character. Not only was she humorous and relatable, but also provided great inside knowledge about the issues and routines only a patient could truly understand. For example, when it comes to the elevator that leads down to the support group basement, she tries to avoid it because to her, that is considered the last day's activity, which by context means that the person is on their last leg and possesses no energy to walk down the stairs. To anyone else, it's such a simple action, but to Hazel, it's a demonstration of her current strength, and the movie does a great job highlighting that aspect, especially when she's determined to climb the stairs in the Anne Frank Museum.
Hazel, I think it's enough.
I got this.
Taken straight from Esther's own memoir, she also fashioned this list of what makes a good nurse, which is someone who doesn't try to pun on your disability and can properly collect blood on the first try. And then we have cancer perks.
Cancer perk.
Total cancer perk.
Defined by Hazel, cancer perks are the free passes in life you get just for having cancer. Free tickets, signed autographs, unlimited pass to skip lines, you name it. It's also the reason why they gave Augustus Waters a driver's license, despite having a prosthetic leg. Green made her perspective of the world inviting and opened my eyes to a community I never really understood until now, vocalized by a teen who's so adamant with her thoughts and emotions that she can clearly communicate what's on her mind, as opposed to her poetic lover, Augustus Waters. I'll say it right now, I'm not into pretentious characters, especially if their pretentiousness doesn't match with the rest of their character. Like, I understand full well this is fiction. Anything goes in fiction. The possibilities are endless. Fine. But can we at least all agree that putting such elegant words in the mouth of a sweaty 17-year-old jock who spends his day playing counterinsurgents, reading counterinsurgent books, is a pretty hard sell? He's not like this all the time, but whenever he decides to scroll through his mental word bank, I don't know, it irked me a bit. It just felt out of character, like Hazel's friend Caitlin in the book, who just had a British accent for no good reason but to be quirky. That's why I like the movie's portrayal of Gus, because they toned down on that aspect and heavily focused more on his good looks and charisma thanks to Ansel Elgort's performance. I saw it as an improvement because aside from one specific part, it didn't serve much of a purpose. Well, also aside from satisfying Hazel's perfect boy fantasy, but that's about it. I'll never forget laughing so hard when Gus received his first email from the author of Hazel's favorite book, Peter Van Houten. He's reading back this very articulate letter to Hazel, and after he finishes, she just goes, "Are you making this up?" To which Gus responds, "Hazel Grace, could I, with my meager intellectual capacities, make up a letter from Peter Van Houten featuring phrases like our triumphantly digitized contemporaneity?" Yes? Are you kidding? There's a part in the story where he invites Hazel over to chill with him and his buddy Isaac, who recently got dumped by his always angel, and what should be this real tense scenario can't be taken seriously with Romeo here being way too extra. Try and guess which one of these three is Augustus. You could go over the bridge and circle back. I'm about to lose my eyesight and she can't handle it. Sadly, the bridge is already under insurgent control due to questionable strategizing by my bereft cohort. Like, bro, we're just chilling out playing some Surge. Now's not the time to flex the fact that you memorized a thesaurus. Could I memorize a Peter Van Houten letter? I legit thought that was the case. At that point, I really thought the story was going in that direction, where his advanced vocabulary words would deceive Hazel into thinking these letters were real until it's revealed they actually were real. But could anyone really be blamed for thinking that? Come on. But Van Houten is very alive and is hiding away in Germany because he can't deal to associate himself with Americans.
You're American.
Incurably so.
I used to think Gus was a headache, but meeting the Peter Van Houten shut me up fast. This guy is a savage with words and just your typical a-hole. Once Hazel gets a hold of this email, she tries to get some answers for the ending of his book, An Imperial Affliction, which is relatable to Hazel in several ways, but ended so abruptly that there was basically no closure for any of the side characters. Van Houten doesn't disclose any information online, paranoid at the thought of someone taking his ideas and writing a sequel, but would freely talk about it if they were to meet in person. Yet even through email, you can see he was being rhetorical about the gesture. But Hazel was a huge fan of his work. She lost count over how many times she reread that book, called it her Bible at one point. If there was any chance to get her answers, she was gonna take it. And it's thanks to Gus that she was granted a genie trip to Germany and meet her literary hero. And that's a meeting no one could ever forget. My favorite scene by far because of how surprisingly intense it was. Up to this point, my expectations were already met with this contemporary love story. The flirtatious banter, their bond through books and broken swing sets, it's also innocent and living in the moment. So imagine my surprise when, after all this time, they finally meet with Van Houten, and not only is he quick to reject, but it's just an absolute monster. He's drinking in the morning, setting up barriers through speech and Swedish rap just so he wouldn't have to talk about the one thing they came all this way to hear. By the end of the story, you understand how sensitive of a topic this is for him, but it still doesn't excuse his behavior. Not after calling them side effects of an evolutionary process that cares little for individual
lives. You are a failed experiment in mutation.
My god, imagine flying across the world just to be jerked around and insulted by someone you admire. It was messed up, sure, but truly one of the better chapters, and an incredible scene delivered by none other than Willem Dafoe. He believed that he ruined their trip, but in reality, he didn't even make a dent. This was the movie's strongest point, the chemistry Woodley and Elgort shared on screen. From start to end, with a few montages inserted, most of the movie depended on showing the affection Hazel and Gus needed from one another, and offered ample time to explore and resolve their faults in one another. Their love was beautiful, and the movie expressed that portion of the story well, but there's one lacking aspect that pushed me towards the book more. It may be a matter of perspective, but I really think it would have added more towards the dramatic side of things. Instead, now whenever I see this movie, it just feels like walking into a room of smoke and mirrors.
Men, at some times, are masters of their fates. The fault, de Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings.
Cancer isn't pretty. I know that's an obvious statement that doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it anyways. Cancer sucks. Your body is working against you. There's always that lingering uncertainty that you might not make it, and forcing your hand to consider your already limited time. Science has improved over the years, but the overwhelming concern will always be present. The reality is harsh, but should be acknowledged, so it really bothers me how the movie essentially looks away from all that pain that comes with cancer. The book had a nice balance with the love story and this discussion about cancer, while the movie simply chooses to focus on nothing but that love, and turning this all into another generic teenage love story with cancer as a subplot. What I loved about Hazel's narrative was how her thoughts on death were too close to comfort. Living with this most of her life, she grew comfortable with the routine and accepted her mundane future until Augustus entered her life, sparking life into this conversation once again. In the story, there's this concern about hurting the people around her. Gus, her mom and dad. One day she's just going to be gone, and all the bonds she's built will be heartbroken, destroying their lives like an emotional grenade.
One day I'm gonna explode, and I'm gonna obliterate everything in my wake, and I don't know, I feel like it's my responsibility to minimize the casualties.
In the book, the conversation came after Hazel dug into Gus's past and read through the Facebook post of his previous girlfriend, Caroline Mathers, who died of a brain tumor. Looking through those comments of prayer and love had Hazel thinking about the impact she might cause to her family, which is a real thought to have, and shows Hazel's compassion towards others, sacrificing her moments of joy just so others could be spared the pain. The book explores these topics much more, and the emotions behind them feel a little more earned than the movie. Instead of just shoving a bunch of sad music and the image of pain so early on, it showed a play to his strengths with character interactions, especially with her mom, played by Laura Dern.
Even when you die, I'll always be your mother.
In the book, she was Hazel's best friend, but still remained a fair mother, while the movie really portrayed her more like a friend. There wasn't anything inherently wrong, I just wish she wasn't so carefree at times, like near the end when she confronts Hazel for spending too much time with Gus and neglecting her own health. That was a solid scene. But then there are moments when you expect a parent to step in, such as the conversation right after Gus surprises Hazel with the trip to Amsterdam. In the book, she tells her mom about it, who thinks it's a bit much. That's a fair parental response, since they are just getting to know each other at that point. But in the movie, there's just no concern or hesitation over this gesture.
It's incredible. Hazel, that's so beautiful.
I know.
Also, remember when I said I couldn't deal with Gus's pretentious side except for one portion of the story? As much as I nagged about it, I will give it praise for doing a much better job contrasting his personality before and after his cancer returned. The charisma and genuine happiness this guy was oozing slowly dulled over the course of months as his body got weaker. There's a specific scene from the book that stuck with me and acted as a perfect example of his condition based on previous interaction. It's not even a major scene either, it's just Hazel and Gus playing counterinsurgents together, but because of Gus's condition worsening, they are practically on the same level of experience. Descriptions like that really showed me how bad it was getting and exposed Hazel's love for this guy. She could barely eat, couldn't sleep. Most of her days were spent watching over Gus, offering her company, and tolerating his fantasy of dying with a legacy. In the first support group meeting where they met, Gus talked about his fear of oblivion, and this is further explored as he continues to talk about his dream of making this big mark in the world and just reaching some level of fame. Those thoughts get bigger until Hazel has had enough and confronts him about this insult to her efforts and, frankly, her existence.
This is your life, okay? This is all you get. You get me, and you get your family, and you get this world, and that's it. And if that's not enough for you, then I'm sorry, but it's not nothing.
Those final chapters were sad to read, but I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed them. Sorry if it makes me sound sadistic, but it's true. Witnessing his chipper side go sour, all I could think of was, yes! Thank you! I felt like I was seeing Gus for the first time in this story and started to sympathize with his pain. Along with Hazel, you witness his incapacity to help himself, becoming more frustrated about being unaccomplished. My man can't even take a simple trip to the store to buy a pack of his metaphorical cigs without making a mess. The look Hazel made when she found him was similar to mine when I read it. I just couldn't believe how low he was sinking at this point. And when I saw this exact scene in the film, I was upset. Not because it lacked the build up to make this scene hit as hard as the book, but because of the scene that came before it. Right after being told the grave news and coming back to Germany, the next scene is just... It's nothing! Hazel and Gus help Isaac throw eggs at his ex's car. Cool. Great. I mean, it happened in the book, yeah, but why now? I feel like it would have been more suited at an earlier part of the film, not here interrupting the beginning of the end. I legit cringed at the awkward placement. The first 2/3 of the movie were fine, but once this tone-deaf transition arrived, it really did open my eyes to how much they were omitting from the audience, which doesn't make any sense either. Didn't they want this movie to be sad? Didn't they want the audience to be walking out with a puddle of tears? I felt like the choices made really crippled the movie because they could have played up the drama and Gus's tragic reality but decided against it. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, not for Esther or Gus, and I wish the movie showed more instead of telling us through dialogue and montages. I wanted to be there, in the moment, alongside Hazel and go through this together. It didn't ruin the whole movie for me, but I was left disappointed for how that specific portion was handled. Also, I kinda low-key wish that the movie would have gone the route of being there at Gus's deathbed. Similar to the book, Gus died off screen, which caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting that eulogy scene to be their last moment together, but overall it was a good surprise, so I'm not too upset about it. But what I really appreciated about the book pertains to this line right here.
Funerals, I decided, are not for the dead. They're for the living.
Throughout the book, Hazel will find herself making comparisons between herself and the rest of society, often emphasizing the division illness can cause between patients and people. Her friendship with Caitlin doesn't feel in sync as before because of how long she's been detached from school. The constant feeling of going out to a public space and being subjected to unwanted attention. Yet, nothing sets her off more than when she's looking through Gus's Facebook page, reading through all the supportive thoughts and prayers and get, but instead of being scared, she gets mad. Mad that all these people never tried to visit him in his final months. Mad that Gus never mentioned any of them to her. As Van Houten said in the book, grief does not change you. It reveals you. That's what this book did to me. The source of my sadness didn't come from Gus's death, but just the overall tone of this scenario and the questions I will ponder and reflect if the roles were reversed. What would happen after I died? Who would show up at my funeral? Where would my legacy stand? The movie captures the love but still keeps you at arm's length from really understanding what it's like. The book drops you in that perspective and tries to let you experience through the eyes of a dying girl how secluded they really are from us, and exposes the truth of our social standings, a reality that I admired so much. The book told a story about cancer patients, while the movie simply told a story about two teens with cancer.
I feel kind of like I'm fooling people. Like, they say these amazing things about me, but I feel like I'm fooling you all because I'm not always amazing, and I'm not always awesome, and I'm not always strong, and I'm not always brave. And you guys should know that, you know? I'm not always this perfect person. Sometimes wish I've never gone through this, and then I realize that if that happened, I wouldn't be who I am, and then I get all like, oh, that's just confusing. But then sometimes I do wish it never happened, the cancer thing.
Almost 11 years since her death, and so much has happened since. I would have liked to get her opinion about the Fantastic Beasts movies or the controversy surrounding J.K. Rowling. Maybe a progress report on how she and her sister Evangeline are holding up, because that was the one relationship that kind of wavered after the cancer. Seriously, if you haven't already, I encourage you to pick up her book. I don't know how many cancer stories are out there, but I'm confident enough to say that this one will give you a good idea of what it feels like. My heart softened not for how it ended, but witnessing the periods of hope the Earl family had for her recovery, ending on a very peaceful note. To the very end, she was loved, and her passing impacted several lives around her. Her story wasn't the first and surely wouldn't be the last. It just makes you wonder how many personal stories are out there but would probably never receive the same amount of luck she had with recognizability. Just imagine how things would have turned out if she never went to that convention. Still, I'm glad the story was told. Green enlightened us with a perspective we wouldn't go out of our way to seek unless it was already present in our own lives. More importantly, he normalizes patience and shows readers that we shouldn't be alienating people based on their illness. Esther's journal wasn't always focused on her condition but on the love and support she received from her family and online friends. Hazel was living a dull life until Gus came around to transform her way of living and open her eyes to a more positive outlook. The movie just didn't do it for me. The chemistry was handled well, but their way of depicting cancer and sadness was pretty glossy at times and didn't seem as genuine as the book. Obviously, I wasn't the target audience for this, so please take my criticisms with a grain of salt. I was more attracted to the commentary than the love story. That's all. I will say though, if you enjoyed this movie, then I think you'll love the Hindi version that came out last year called, and excuse my pronunciation, Dil Bekhara. I don't know if it'll play anywhere outside of Disney Hotstar, but I managed to watch the movie out of curiosity. And to give a quick review, it follows the main storyline beat by beat, but because of the culture and setting, the changes do enough to give the film its own identity. So for instance, instead of a book, Kinsey is obsessed with this song that was never completed, and there's this whole other subplot with her and Manny making a movie together. I won't say much else, but I enjoyed this adaptation much more than the American version. It has a lot more heart and feels less campy, so if you ever come across it, check it out and tell me what you think. Lastly, I want to say something to John Green, for the off chance that he comes across this video. I'm sure our paths will cross again in the future, and although there were some aspects I didn't like about this book, I'm not gonna forget what you did here. You basically gave her a second life, man. You made her immortal, granting her the love she never got to experience herself. You even dedicated a whole day to her that still goes on every year. I'm sure she would have been proud of what you wrote. Thank you for keeping her alive and sharing a part of her with the rest of the world. Stay awesome, man.